Today we have Jodi Constantino with us, and Jodi has done a lot of bold career pivots over and over again, from FBI to strategy consulting, working as a biologist, risk management now. She's an executive in risk management and corporate compliance, currently at Sallie Mae. So welcome, Jodi.
Very excited to be here.
So you've done so many bold career pivots. And I know it's something that's hard for a lot of people to figure out when to do it, how to do it. Sometimes there's people that go against it, and you've experienced all of it. So let's break it down. Let's start with the fact that most women at some point decide to be moms.
Yes.
And you have some beautiful children.
Yes, I sure do.
So how did that part of your life change your career decisions or your career trajectory?
Yeah, absolutely. I can start back really to my time at the FBI, and even through that role, as I was beginning to consider trying out the private sector and I was looking into MBA school as a possibility. Of course, that's ultimately where I went. I also thought about trying out the CIA. I'd been working in some intel areas, and I was really interested in doing more in that in a covert way. But at the time, I was in a very serious relationship, and I had gotten engaged, and certainly children were a thing on the horizon for both of us. So it probably started all the way back to that point, really in my mid-20s, recognizing pretty early on that the lifestyle, that type of an agent role would bring with it wouldn't be conducive to the family environment that I ultimately was looking for. And I chose not to pursue that. And I did go to MBA school instead. I went through MBA school and I moved into strategy consulting, which is an absolute whirlwind after working for the federal government. Many hours, lots of travel, sometimes short notice, a lot of red eyes coming home and going straight to the office in the morning, things like that. Also not conducive to the family environment that ultimately we were looking to build. And when we did choose to get pregnant, I chose to step away from that role. It was best in a lot of ways for me, that just being one of them. And ultimately, I found a great role internal to that company. This was at Booz Allen Hamilton. There were so many opportunities there to do so many different things, it being such a large firm. And through that, I was able to find an internal consulting role where we really worked for the C-suite of Booz Allen and did work there. But I was able to stay local, which was fantastic. I was able to work from home a couple of days a week, which was huge. And this is, of course, all prior pandemics. At the time, it was quite novel, and it was a wonderful experience for me and my family.
So I know that there aren't that many roles in management consulting that are not a consultant that requires those crazy travels. So was that something that you talked about? You mentioned internally. Did you like quit and say, oh, I'm leaving, and then they offered it? Or did you ask them before you even started looking outside? How did that work?
So this is a funny story. I had hit my breaking point with that role in a few different ways, including the family decisioning. And I'd come home from work and I'd said to my husband at the time, I really think I need to quit this job. I was starting to have serious migraines, and they were repetitively coming on Sunday evenings. When I was packing and having to leave, I started seeing a doctor for it. We did the scans of my brain, all the things. And in the end, he said, I think you probably just need to switch jobs. So I took some great medical advice, and I decided to talk to my husband about that. And he said, you can't quit. He said, I just quit today. I said, wait, what? So we had that conversation. There was a big shakeup at his architecture firm, and partners went their separate ways. And he was choosing which partners to move with. And so there was just a lot of upheaval at the time. And I thought, oh, geez, okay, I need to hang in there a little bit longer. And so it wasn't entirely on my own choice and timing, right? As we're in relationships and forming families, we start to make those joint decisions. But it was probably about 6 months thereafter. So I knew that I wanted to leave that role, and had started asking around internally, started putting out some feelers softly, and had heard through the grapevine that there were a couple of other both women and men who had left the external consulting ranks and moved into an internal consulting group. And so I reached out to them, and had some good exploratory conversations and applied for the role.
Ah, interesting. And I know how hard that role in management consulting, because I do remember the one time in my life, and I love my sleep, that I only slept 1 hour was when I was in management consulting. And that was the moment I realized this is not for me. I can hardly function. It is a disaster. So I'm glad you're able to find that. You started with molecular biology, you did your MBA, you got into business consulting, then you joined corporate America with finance. That's a lot of changes, especially for a woman. So what motivated those transitions for you?
So there were several things. Certainly, some of the early transitions were driven by the desire for more creativity in my role and to think bigger and do things faster. That was part of what was difficult at working at the FBI laboratory. It's very protocol driven work. And I had come from an environment in undergrad where I was performing research that was ultimately published. And that's a space where you're encouraged to think outside the box, think about different ways to do this, be novel. So it was a big pivot intellectually to be working more protocol based work, which is so important in forensics. You need to be able to ultimately testify in court that your scientists followed the proper protocols and processing samples, et cetera. And it can be very important to a case. So not to undermine that in any way, it wasn't for me ultimately. I wanted more freedom of expression, if you will, like in my workplace. And I was ready to get into something a little more business oriented that would start to give me a sense of whether that was something I liked or not. Working in a laboratory environment alone is just so different from working in a corporate office type environment. So it was important to me to even try out that feeling of not being in a lab. As I moved on from, and I moved into strategy consulting, certainly family was one driver. But another big driver of my pivots is what's resonating with my soul, to be honest, right? Working for the FBI had incredible purpose and mission absolutely every day that you went to work. And you knew that you were helping people out there, especially working in the laboratory the way that we were working. People are waiting for answers, right? On both sides. And it's exciting work and it's important work. But ultimately, when I moved into strategy consulting, I just couldn't feel that same sense of mission. We're definitely rubbing elbows with high-level CEOs, which is an exciting thing. And you're pushing and working long hours and traveling and having wonderful meals and all those great things and getting all the hotel points. But in the end, that and even the higher salaries, that was not what really fed my soul. And I was looking for something that connected me a little bit more to the mission I'd and ultimately really led me to risk management, where in banking especially, but even at Booz Allen, where in that instance, I'm really protecting the taxpayers, right? Ensuring that these government contractors are charging their time, their expenses, their labor, all these things appropriately and in accordance with laws and rules and regulations. And now I'm doing the same in the banking sector to ensure that banks are acting on the best interests of their customers.
It's interesting. You left the FBI because of the protocols. You wanted the creativity. Then you got the creativity, but you lost the soul. Okay, how can I get both?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that money was part of the equation as well.
Yes, 100%. By this point, I was a single mom. So that's a really different kind of equation. When you start thinking about stability, you're starting to think about salary, you're thinking about retirement, you're thinking about how do I pay for college? So there's a lot that went into those decisions. All of a sudden, I wasn't making them just for me and my husband. Now I'm making them for myself and my children.
Plus the time and the lifestyle that you were talking about. So how do you know? Because often here's what happens. People get in a job, they don't like it, but they stay because there's nothing significant that pushes them to the edge to actually, because it's a lot of work to change. There's a lot of uncertainty to change, pivot career or jobs. How did you know? What was the moment? Was there a moment that you said, okay, this is the time I have to go and I have to start searching for another job? Or did it just naturally flow over time? How did it work for you?
Yeah, for the most part, it's a buildup for me. And then I get to a point where I say, nope, okay, now I'm ready. It's typically something I think about for a little while. And I really like your question because it's advice that I've given to people that I've mentored over the years when there's significant organizational change. And maybe someone who was my direct report is someone else's direct report now, or vice versa. Or the organizational shifts are so large that you no longer work with someone that you worked with closely. And the advice I've always given is always give it 6 months, right? Always, because you have to wait for things to settle. And it goes for yourself when you're entering a new role as well. And whether that's at a new company or a different role at the same company, I always give myself 6 months grace of it's going to feel a little crazy. Your time is not going to be your own for a while, right? You're going to be juggling a lot of things. Sometimes you're going to feel like you're drowning. And just remember, in 6 months, if you haven't gotten your arms around it and rebalanced yourself, then maybe it's time to look for something different. But I really try to give every role and every leader at least that 6 months. And so often, in fact, in every instance but one, then it has settled to a place where I said, oh no, this is going to work and I'm going to be fine. I figured out how to juggle all this. These things are new, these people are new, but I got there. And I really think having that patience and grace for yourself is so important.
Yeah, because those first 6 months are always the hardest. New relationships,
Yes.
new company, trying to prove yourself, so much going on. And yeah, so important to do that. Have you ever encountered resistance from some family member or someone who you cared about regarding one of your career pivot decisions?
Yes, absolutely. I can think of a couple. Certainly, when I started at the FBI, my grandfather, of all people, who I was very close to, he had the concern. He said, it's dangerous work. You need to know what you're doing. He was very nervous and concerned about that role. I said, I'm going to be in a laboratory. I'm just a nerd. Nobody's worrying about me. And he slowly over time relaxed on that and then found it really fascinating, would cut out all the clips in the newspaper and all those great things. That was fun. Now, when I chose to leave the FBI, I had my stepfather in my ear pushing on me saying, is this really the thing you want to do? And this is when I really think we as humans have to step back and examine the broader picture of what experiences and events have shaped the thoughts and feelings of the loved ones around us and why they might be giving us the guidance they're giving us. Sometimes we're blind to our own biases that we've built from our own experiences. Sometimes it's fantastic advice and you should definitely listen, right? And you don't always know which is which. But I'll say my stepfather had come from a very long career on Wall Street. He was in the IT sector there, but in working for banking for so long, he saw the cutthroat nature at its worst, really, of the private sector, just rounds and rounds of layoffs, people being scared every year, things like that through the years that he happened to be in that industry. And that really shaped his thoughts and feelings about the private sector, the loyalty there, things like that. And he was pushing me hard on, are you sure you really want to be leaving a stable job with the government? You stay there, you'll eventually have a pension. You're a grade A worker. You're going to do great there. Why would you want to leave that and go to this very volatile place? But it was a very open and fun conversation in the end. I told him, I'm unmarried right now. I have no kids right now. And if this doesn't work out and I have to eat peanut butter and jelly every day, I can do that. It'll be okay. So I had faith in taking the leap, definitely more so than the family around me. But again, his advice isn't bad advice. It's very valid advice given all of the experience that he'd lived through. And honestly, I've seen it happen around me too. So it wasn't untrue either.
Yeah, and I love the way you put it. Our loved ones, sometimes they say something that we don't like, but the reality is they're trying to protect us and they're sharing their own experiences, which are different than our experiences. And by having that open communication, we can at least consider that into our decision. Now, did you have a single conversation with him to get to a point where?
Been one or two or
Okay.
maybe three ultimately, but part of it too was my age, right? I was 25 years old thinking about taking this leap to get my MBA. And when you're 20, you do think you know it all. And you just know that this is the next great adventure and maybe it'll go well and maybe it won't. Now that I'm in my 40s and I have children and I have a home to provide and all of these things, my risk profile, I'll use that word as a risk management expert, my risk profile has significantly changed. I'm not sure I would have made the same decision at this point in my life when I'm 8 years from a pension or whatever it might be. But certainly at that point, it was probably going in one ear and out the other, as they say.
Did these pivots that you were doing early in your 20s, essentially, you changed career so many times. Was that helpful to you to actually figure out what you were looking for ultimately, since now it's harder to make those changes because there's so many other commitments? Do you regret anything at all? Or would you have done anything differently?
What a great question. I really don't regret any of it. I am so grateful for all of my different career experiences. They all brought so much to me in such different ways to do exactly what you said, really bring me to a place where I find a lot of joy and fulfillment in my work. And that's not to say that intellectually I've slowed down in any way at all. I'm still that person. I'm building a business on the side and doing entrepreneurial things. I wrote a kids book a few years ago. And so I very actively still explore other talents, interests, and all of that. But certainly my full-time role always comes first, and I'm most dedicated to that. But no, absolutely no regrets. Sometimes I've thought, what would it have been like if I had stayed in molecular biology a little longer? Because science just has my heart. And you could call me a recovering molecular biologist. I still call myself one. I'll talk to anybody about anything at a molecular level. It's so much fun. So I love to geek out with other biologists and folks who have that in their background. So yeah, maybe there's some things that I wish I could have carried on a little longer in different ways. But the path that I took was so exciting. And I really feel like there's a certain magic in believing you can do anything you want to do. And society, the world, our parents, right? Sometimes our spouse, they can be very limiting to our thinking. And I've never subscribed to that. And I look back even at applying for the internship I applied for at the that eventually brought me there full time. What business did I have applying for that, right? I'm one student out of thousands and thousands of students in the country at the time. I'm at Carnegie Mellon, which is a wonderful institution. I'm only a sophomore at the time, right? So I haven't even proven, I haven't published any research. What was I thinking applying for this thing? And there I was. I got it. And there were one or two from every state, and I was one from Pennsylvania. So it was an amazing thing to just put yourself out there and say, maybe I can do this. I modeled for a period of time, and I've done a commercial and I've done some commercial print. And I just thought, why not? Why not try this? And again, like there's just this beautiful magic in saying, yeah, I'm gonna write a book, and I'm gonna do some research, and I'm gonna go to lighthouses, and I'm gonna write down the details of what they look like there, and I'm gonna go to the beach I want to write about. And I worked on that for a couple of years. It was just an awesome project and led me into a place of looking for a publisher and learning how to do that. My friends always laugh because when I was in the process of that, I thought, I don't know, how do you get an agent? I don't know how to do that. And I wrote just random letters to celebrities that had books that they'd published and whatnot. And one of them was J.K. Rowling. And she only takes handwritten letters. She doesn't have, at the time, this was 5-6 years ago, there was no electronic way of sending her a letter. And I had some stationery in my basement that had beautiful lavender plants all over it. I hand wrote her a letter about it. And don't you know, her team wrote me back and said, here's the book she suggests that you go get, because this is the book that she used when she was trying to figure out how to get an agent. And it tells you everything about all the letters to write. But if you don't ask, you can't get an answer from J.K. Rowling, right?
Did
So
you
it's
think she was going to answer you?
Oh, it was written from, I'm sure, a team member that she has, and it said, this is the book she suggests for you to go read up. This is what she used when she went through this process for herself, and it's the go-to. It wasn't a form letter. They wrote me a letter, and it was pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because you do have all these different sides of you and of your personality. You're a multifaceted woman. And
Yes.
so you're looking to explore different sides of who you are and what you have to offer. And the only way of doing that is experimenting and trying things out. And I love that story, because you reached out to a bunch of people, even though you had no idea really what you were doing, but you were able to get advice from the top.
Yes, absolutely.
So that was pretty special. What about values? I know that you do have a set of values that you lean on. How has that been a part of any of your decision making around your career
Yes,
choices?
absolutely. Again, I started at the FBI so young, right? I was 21 when I was there for my internship. I was there full time by the time I was 22. And I hadn't had other career opportunities before that. I had worked part time at some law firms in the summer doing secretarial work, but I really hadn't experienced a corporate role or any other type of full time job before. So, really, as a young person, is all I knew was to be connected to this fidelity, bravery, integrity, right? It was written everywhere, and you were very much expected to be living those values. And I really gravitated toward that. I'd always had an interest in law and justice and things like that. I used to sneak into my parents' room when I was little and watch Charlie's Angels from under the TV or under the couch or the bed in their bedroom. I'd look up.
Wow. Sneaky.
I just loved the private investigator stuff, and it was so exciting. Absolutely, that's fascinated so much. And really, what drove me in the end to leave was this value of, I have more to offer, and I know that I can be recognized more than I'm being recognized. I did feel a certain undervalue, because I think it's a natural part of working at the government, being a high performing worker. And there's a limited number of ways to get recognized that way. You often get more work, certainly, but there aren't bonuses, right? There isn't 401k matching in the same way we talk about it, and all these other great perks with benefits and things in the private sector. So again, not having been tied to family, children, etc., I thought, well, if I'm going to experiment with this private sector, I think I should do it now, and let's see if, what it feels like to be pushed harder and to feel the reward come back. And when I got to strategy consulting, I really said, oh, I'm being pushed a lot harder, but the reward that's coming back isn't one that's resonating with my value set. And while there's beautiful work that's done through strategy consulting, just amazing minds, amazing thinkers, and amazing advice and implementation for these huge companies, it wasn't something that fed my soul the way I needed it to keep working those hours. Like you said, having that 1 hour of sleep and eating out of vending machines all week and airplane food, it wasn't there for me that way. It was time for me to move on from that. Very much values driven that way.
Yeah, I can see that. And then another thing you also shared was I think the investment banking choice.
Yes. So while I was in MBA school, my first year, I'm again, as a scientist, I'm very mathematically oriented. My kids get sick of me telling them that algebra is my favorite. So I just love it when they have algebra homework and they roll their eyes at me. But I love math. I love analysis, number crunching, all of those things. And the markets were very interesting to me, the financial markets. So I did move towards interviewing with investment banking firms for that summer internship that's so important in your MBA career. And I was getting turned down, and I thought, okay, what is going on? I feel like I'm performing well, and I was getting picked up with other types of interviews, but just not the investment banking. And I'm not sure what's going on with my interviewing style. I talked to people at the Career Center and to test out how I was doing and the types of answers I was providing, and that nothing came from that. But as I started talking to more of my MBA school colleagues who were coming from the investment banking environment, they laughed at me and they said, "You're coming from this place of the FBI where they investigate white collar crime, and the value set that you're tied to being too conservative for space like investment banking, where not to say they're pushing to illegality, but they certainly are pushing creatively the envelope right to the edge of that, right? Because they want to create the most value for their clients, for their own bank, all of that good stuff. And I think I was likely seen as someone who wasn't going to push that quite to the edge. And they were right on with that assessment. So all for the best, right? So it goes to show you with those stories too, the things that don't work out are often for the best too.
And like there was something in you that they could figure it out. Obviously, the past and what you were working at with, but they could tell from probably the way you interacted. There's some element of the value that where they saw conflict,
Yeah.
which we're gonna get to in a moment, which is a little bit about how you show up. So what I find also really fascinating about your career choices, and this is just a comment, my observation from what I'm hearing, is there's certain intentionality in your decisions. It's not as just casual. Like there's some element of casual, but there's a lot of intentionality and thinking behind it as well. Like let me try things out for 6 months. Let me think about my values. Let's look at what my needs are, going to be with family plans, or I'm looking for to use my creativity, or use this, or use that. And I'm an interviewer for my business school for candidates, and that is a mandatory question. We always have to ask candidates about their career decisions. And it's very important for them to be intentional and be able to explain all that they do, and tie a story around it. So I love how you actually, if I were interviewing you for my MBA, you would get through, like you would pass, because you have a lot of intentionality around it. It was just quite lovely to hear and fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you worked a lot in male-dominated workplaces, FBI, management consulting, finance, all of that.
Yes.
Has that ever altered your behavior in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. In the social ether, we hear the most about feeling like you have to quiet yourself, right? And how women can be perceived more negatively for speaking up in the same way as a male. Over my career, I had less issues with speaking up and being assertive about my thoughts, though early on, even in education, I found myself coping in different ways, and it wasn't through necessarily shrinking myself, but it certainly was through hiding a certain level of femininity, right? In college, I never wore anything form-fitting at all. I was always very fit. I always had huge oversized this or that, and oftentimes my shirts had small holes in them that were acid burns from chemistry lab, from splattering and things like that. So it was, I didn't wear makeup. It wasn't any of that. And I do feel like part of it certainly is about camouflaging, right? When you've been in an environment from a very young age. I look back even to high school. I went to a regional high school in a very rural area. It was 3 townships, and there were still only 100 kids in our graduating class, so very small school. And in those most advanced classes, it was majority boys, right? And me, and sometimes one other girl. And you do start to cope with laughing things off, especially being a taller, thinner blonde. You can easily fall into a role of being the butt of the joke, or not really being the smart one, even though you're in these very advanced classes. So there's certainly elements of that where I would look toward humor to move through awkward situations where I felt like my voice wasn't being heard or I was being put down, to even just the way I would dress and hold myself. And it really took into my 30s to get to a place where I felt comfortable really expressing more femininity without the apology for it, if you will.
What was the transition? What helped you accept yourself and bring your female side to work?
Yes, I would say, oddly enough, I think business school helped me a lot. It was mostly men in business school. I went to Darden at UVA, and I want to say it was about a third female at the time of my class-ish. So we were certainly in the minority. But that being said, I was exposed to women that weren't coming only out of investment banking or only out of a role like really no one came from a role like I had in the government at the FBI. Although there was a female who came from DIA, from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and we had a lot in common. But I started to see more of that femininity coming out with women who were very motivated and driven in their career and looking to do bigger and more and better and all of those things. And I do feel like that gave me a certain break from the corporate feel, right? I went full time, so I was a student for 2 full years. And coming out of that, I think I did feel more comfortable expressing some of those things.
So surrounding yourself with women who were in a similar kind of industry before and were able to be fully themselves as
Yes.
women was in a way inspiring to you.
Yes, most definitely.
And what about one of the things that's important for us women especially, but emotional well-being? Is that something, how do you take care of your own emotional well-being when all of this craziness, you've had some really time-consuming jobs, also personal life things that happen. How do you manage your own emotional well-being?
Yes, I'm really passionate about emotional well-being, self-care, positive self-talk, all of those things. And I spend a fair amount of my free time reading about them, listening to podcasts about them, like this one, and feeling empowered by the things I'm hearing for sure. Even back to my jobs at Capital One here at Sallie Mae, when I hold a team meeting, the last 15 minutes is reserved for self-care time. And I release everyone and I say, okay, whatever you do, you're not going to work for the next 15 minutes, and go walk your pet outside, water your plants, do a few yoga poses, do the thing that brings you a little peace and lets you take a big, deep breath in your day, right? And recenter yourself. So it is something that has grown very important to me through my personal experiences with career shifts, right? Family dynamics, divorce, all of these things that are very tough, especially with young children. It's so important to take time. And as moms, especially, we're very pressured to not think about ourselves first by society, often by our own kids, right? Sometimes by our spouses who might be underestimating what we need from that self-care point of view to be good spouses and mothers and all of that. So it's important. I take my time out for my workouts. That's always been a release for me, for sure. So I have my hobbies that way. I have my creative outlets, and those things are very important to me. So you heard about the writing, and if it's not writing, it's entrepreneurial things. And that's been exciting. But I think anyone who has been touched by struggles with mental health learns very quickly that you have to take care of yourself and your family and give them space to do that. My son, he struggled immensely with depression and anxiety. He had a tough dynamic in the family and was having a hard time coping. He had so much help surrounding him. We had a lot of different therapists. We had medication. We did hospital programs, so a lot of outreach and a lot of help. And we did end up losing him to depression last September. So the idea of caring for yourself before you get to a place where you can't recover from is so important. And I'll never stop supporting organizations like the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And there's many that are local to me here in DC that I support as well. it's so important to really raise awareness to mental health, and self-care is almost like step one.
Yeah, I mean, every time you share that, I get the goosebumps because it's it's such a intense experience for a mother and for a family to go through.
Yes.
And not only is it's such a heavy experience, but it can destabilize everyone if the
Yes.
self-care is not in place. And then maybe in the middle of it is the exact time that you might want to abstain from self-care because you want to keep giving. But the more you take away from your own self-care, the less you're able to serve in the moment. So it's really tough, but it's so important to advocate for mental health and our own being and the well-being of other people around us. So it's
Yes.
wonderful
Yes.
that you're also bringing that to your team.
Yes. Yeah, we really do. And a member of my team lost someone from her family this year, and she struggles at times as well. And sometimes our catch ups at work are just to talk about mental health check ins and see how each other's doing and get a sense of how are you carrying on each day? Are you going hour by hour? Some days you do. And it's difficult, even in the family dynamic. Everyone grieves differently, and it can be hard. When you want to feel close, sometimes you feel further away from others. Some people gravitate to grief counseling. I have, others don't. So it can be really difficult. And for me, pouring some of that grief into a hobby has been really good for me. I found that I did step away from some of my self-care routines, as you mentioned, because it's very difficult when you're grieving to keep putting those things first. And like the entrepreneurial project I have on the side is making wellness products, right? Because I learned what helped me to even just shower, because some days you don't care, and it can go on for days. And just the smallest things like an aromatherapy shower can actually make you say, oh, okay, this is a 5 minutes I want for myself. I want to get in the shower and I just want to smell some lavender and bring back a little peace and center yourself a bit when you feel like you are a bit in a hurricane.
Yeah. And it's wonderful that you're bringing those two passions, your creativity and the value that you're bringing through your own experience of mental wellness together with these projects for sure. And it's at the same time, while you're going through all of that and the grieving process, work is still happening on the side. And
Yes.
you have to have certain conversations there to create enough space for yourself to function and be able to carry the two things at the same time.
Yes, you're 100% right. And it's very uncomfortable. And I'm someone who shares fairly openly. So I can only imagine what it would feel like for someone who doesn't gravitate to that naturally. I do have to talk to my boss on a somewhat regular basis about how am I doing. For a long time, I was stunned and I couldn't drive. And so there was no going to the office, right? There was just working from home. And then it was, well, how do I start to get to a place where I go in once a week? And being open and honest that there are some weeks where the anxiety and depression hits really hard trying to get out of bed in the morning, and adding on having to get ready in a way to be office present isn't doable. And then there are days where you're going to need crying breaks and you don't want to be in the office for that. And being open with the people you need to be open with about that to receive the grace you need at work is so important. And people are more than happy to give you that grace, but they don't know if they don't know. So sharing is a big part of that. And it's uncomfortable, but it's so necessary.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing here, because these topics are so taboo. People don't talk about them and then people feel
Yes.
alone and like they can't talk about it. And maybe no one else has gone through that experience. It's very helpful that you're sharing that here with us. Now, to end on a different note, who is a female role model that you've had?
Oh, wow. So I know we talked a little bit about this, and I have written about it before. And Barbara Walters, first of all, just start with, there's so many. There are so many. Some of my former bosses I still keep in touch with, and female bosses. And I go, oh my gosh, I really look up to them. Bosses that I have currently, all of that. But yes, I'm an avid autobiography reader. I love to hear about people's stories, and I bet you do too, based on the work that you do. It would be my guess. Or someday you'll help someone write one. But I was so amazed at what she pushed through as a female in news in her lifetime was incredible. These are the women that really did start to break through so that women like me can be in these senior leadership positions today. And I have so much the path that was made for me. And she's one of them. Talk about a trailblazer. And she was also a woman that no one was going to tell her what she was capable or incapable of. She very much was going to push through. She knew what she wanted to do and she knew she could do it. And that type of confidence is just like intoxicating. I just found that so amazing. And she had family members that had mental illness issues, and she was just such a compassionate human, just incredible that way as well. Talk about someone who just had an impact on the world up until their very last day. So I'm quite sure she's extremely missed, but I really enjoyed her story.
Yeah, I was just watching some little clips from her interviews with Vladimir Putin and some presidents, and asking really hard questions. And I thought, wow, she's something. And she would do it with so much elegance.
Yes, absolutely. And what's also interesting is being able to also take the view of how have we evolved since our role models had to push through and do this. And something that comes to mind is she talks a lot in her book about over preparation, and to the degree to which she would research before any kind of interview was immense. And in today's feminist focused research and writings, it's a known situation for females to be in, where they say, in order to make sure I perform, I'm going to over prepare. And it's a very female centric behavior that we've learned through data now males don't have. It's very interesting what she felt she needed to do to get to the places she got to. And now we've even evolved like a step further away from some of those behaviors while still excelling.
Yeah, and I'm all for it. The day we don't have to over prepare, it will be a whole different situation, because
Yes.
we already have so much to deal with, so much more work between the company that we're working at and house activities and mother activities than men. We can't be over preparing all the time for everything. Right. It just doesn't work. We still have to be respected and taken seriously. So I'm glad she's helped us get there a little bit.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Jodi, for sharing your career journey, stories and pivots and everything that went into it, but also how you find your own emotional well-being and how we can as well.
Yes. And thank you so much for having me. This is an absolutely wonderful podcast. I am thrilled to be a part of it.
Thank you.